The chandeliers above glowed with a golden shimmer, scattering light across polished marble floors and towering canvases framed in gilt. Music whispered from a string quartet in the corner, soft enough not to overpower the hushed murmurs of the wealthy patrons drifting through the gallery. Isabella Hart stood near the edge of the room, her hand resting on the curve of her 8-month belly. Her dark hair was pinned neatly back, but loose strands had slipped forward, clinging to her temple from the effort of keeping up appearances. She was supposed to feel proud tonight. The charity exhibition was partly her work after all, but all she felt was out of place. Everywhere she turned, eyes lingered a little too long. A pregnant woman among satin gowns and tailored suits was enough to stir whispers, but a single pregnant woman hosting an event of this scale became gossip fodder. She caught fragments. Such a shame. She should rest at home. Does she even belong here? Words sharp enough to pierce the fragile shield she tried to hold. Still, Isabella stood tall, determined not to let her trembling heart show. The art was her refuge, her world. She had fought for this exhibition to happen, pulling long nights, even when exhaustion threatened to drag her under. Tonight was meant to prove she was more than the scandal of her swollen belly. She shifted her weight, wincing slightly as the baby pressed low. Across the room, she spotted the centerpiece of the night, a massive canvas splashed with strokes of fire and shadow. The artist had called it rebirth. Isabella felt its meaning deeper than most would ever guess. She turned, searching the crowd, and that was when her gaze collided with his. Adrian Blackwell. Even among the glittering crowd, he stood apart. His tall frame was clothed in a perfectly cut suit of midnight black, his presence commanding without effort. He had been, Ian whispered about for years, the reclusive millionaire who collected rare works like other men collected trophies, known for his sharp deals and colder silences. Most said he rarely showed his face in public, yet here he was, standing so still he might have been carved from stone. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, locked on her as if he had been waiting for the moment she would notice him. The air around her shifted, charged with something she couldn't name. She tried to look away, to busy herself with a tray of champagne glasses a waiter carried past, but her eyes betrayed her, drawn back to his with a pull she could not resist. For a heartbeat, the noise of the gallery dimmed, and it was only him, the weight of his stare, the unreadable mask of his face, the flicker of something like recognition in his expression. Isabella's lips parted, words forming in her mind, though she knew she'd never speak them. Why did he look at her like that? She felt both exposed and shielded, as though he had seen the depth of her struggle and yet offered no judgment. Before she could make sense of it, someone at her side tapped her shoulder, drawing her into polite conversation. By the time she looked back, Adrian Blackwell had moved on, vanishing deeper into the crowd like a shadow melting into the night. Still, the impression lingered. Her pulse thrummed in her throat. For the first time that evening, she no longer heard the whispers or felt the sting of judgment. Instead, she carried the weight of his stare, mysterious and unsettling, like a secret she was not meant to uncover yet. And as she smoothed her hand over her stomach, she wondered if the moment meant nothing, or if it was the beginning of everything. The night deepened and the gallery's glow only seemed to grow brighter as more guests streamed in. Isabella drifted between clusters of polished faces, offering smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Every step she took was accompanied by the soft echo of heels on marble and the prickling awareness of stares that followed her swollen figure. It was supposed to be her triumph, a night to prove her worth as a curator, yet she could feel the judgment press against her like invisible hands pushing her to the margins. She told herself to breathe, to focus on the art, but the whispers seemed louder than the music. At the far end of the hall, a group of women in diamond necklaces and gowns cut to perfection leaned together, their eyes darting toward Isabella. Their laughter was delicate, but their words cut like glass. One murmured about how unprofessional it was to parade herself in such a state. Another wondered who the father might be. A third suggested she was clinging to the gallery to gain sympathy. Isabella tightened her grip on her clipboard, her knuckles white, her cheeks burning. The paintings she had fought to hang, the artists she had convinced to contribute, all of it seemed overshadowed by the scandal of her existence. But then, through the corner of her eye, she saw him again. Adrian Blackwell stood near a sculpture of twisted bronze, surrounded by men eager to impress him. Yet he was silent, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. When one of the men made a boastful remark about a recent purchase, Adrian didn't bother to respond. Instead, his gaze slid across the room until it found Isabella again. The pull of it stopped her in her tracks. She could feel her heart pound against her ribs, not from attraction alone, but from the weight of being truly seen. The moment shattered when the lights dimmed slightly, and the curator in charge of the Venning's announcements called for attention. Guests gathered around the main stage where the painting Rebirth stood, covered by a silk drape. Isabella's breath caught. This was the centerpiece, the one she had fought to include, the one critics had said was too raw, too wild for a polished event. As the drape was pulled away, the crowd gasped. Bold colors spilled across the canvas like a storm breaking, flames rising from ashes, shadows melting into light. For Isabella, the work was more than paint. It was her soul on display. Applause rippled through the hall, but beneath it, a sharper sound rose. A voice from the crowd, mocking and loud enough for others to hear, sneered about how fitting it was that a pregnant woman would showcase a painting about rebirth. Laughter followed, cruel and careless. Isabella froze, the sting of humiliation wrapping around her throat like a chain. Her vision blurred, and for a heartbeat she thought she might crumble. But before she could retreat, movement stirred near the sculpture. Adrian Blackwell stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hall, calm yet powerful. He spoke of the piece, its raw brilliance, its daring honesty. He declared it the most important work of the evening and announced he would buy it on the spot for a sum so large the whispers died in stunned silence. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the cruel laughter vanished into thin air. Isabella's breath hitched. He had not looked at the painting when he spoke. He had looked at her, and in that gaze she felt something deeper than defense, something laced with mystery, as though he had chosen not just the painting but her. The air around her shifted again, tense and heavy, as if the night had only begun to unravel secrets she could not yet imagine. Her stomach tightened with a sudden sharpness that made her catch her breath. She pressed her hand against her belly, trying to steady herself. For a fleeting second she wondered if it was nerves. But somewhere deep inside, she sensed that tonight, everything was about to change. The silk curtains swayed as if the gallery itself could sense the shift in the air. Isabella tried to steady her breathing, her hand pressed firmly against her stomach. The ache had sharpened into something deeper, more urgent, but she pushed it aside, forcing a smile at passing guests. The applause still echoed faintly from Adrian's bold declaration, but beneath the polished chatter she could feel a storm brewing inside her body. Her throat tightened, her pulse raced, and when she reached for the edge of a table to steady herself, her glass slipped, shattering against the marble floor. Gasps followed, eyes turning once again to the pregnant woman who did not belong. A waiter rushed to clean the mess. The diamond-clad women whispered with thin smiles, and Isabella whispered to herself that it was only stress, that she could hold on until the night was over. But then the sharp warmth spread down her legs, sudden and undeniable, and silence cut across the gallery like a blade. Her water had broken. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Conversations faltered, music stumbled, and every pair of eyes locked on her swollen figure standing in the glow of the chandeliers. Isabella's face burned, humiliation flooding her as if the marble floor had cracked open beneath her. She turned, desperate to retreat, but her knees threatened to give way. Then, through the stunned crowd, he appeared. Adrian Blackwell moved with a calmness that silenced the chaos. His voice was low, but carried enough command that people instinctively stepped aside. He reached her before anyone else did, his hand steady on her arm, his gaze fixed on her trembling face. She tried to protest, words tumbling incoherently about not wanting to cause a scene, but Adrian's eyes left no room for argument. "You are not alone," he said, and the firmness in his tone anchored her. The next moments blurred. He barked an order for his car to be brought immediately. The elite guests who had sneered only minutes before now parted like water, stunned by the sight of the coldest man in the city holding a trembling woman with such quiet determination. As Adrian guided her toward the exit, Isabella's chest tightened, a mix of fear and something she could not name. She had spent months standing tall against judgment, refusing to show weakness. Yet here she was, leaning against a man she barely knew, her life and her child's life suddenly in his hands. The night air outside was cold and sharp against her damp skin. Adrian's limousine pulled up, sleek and black, its doors flung open by a driver who looked as shocked as the crowd left behind. He lifted her gently inside, his movements precise, controlled, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Isabella clutched the seat, her breaths shallow, and through the haze she felt his hand wrap around hers. His grip was firm, grounding, pulling her back from the edge of panic. The city lights blurred as the car sped forward. Her body ached, her mind reeled, but in the midst of fear she caught his expression. Adrian Blackwell, the man whispered about as cold and unreachable, sat beside her with eyes that burned not with detachment, but with something far more dangerous. A fierce protectiveness, a vow unspoken, as if he had decided in that instant that her fate and her child's fate now belonged to him. Isabella shivered. Not from the pain alone, but from the mystery of a man who had no reason to care, yet looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. She could not know yet that this night was only the beginning, and that every step from here would unravel truths she was not ready to face. The limousine cut through the city like a silent shadow, its tinted windows holding back the chaos of flashing lights and honking traffic. Inside, the air was tense, thick with unspoken fear. Isabella leaned back against the leather seat, her breaths uneven, her hands clutching the swell of her stomach as another wave of pain gripped her. She whispered that she could not do this, that it was too soon, but her voice cracked and faded in the hum of the engine. Adrian sat beside her, his posture controlled yet his eyes fixed on her every movement. His hand remained wrapped around hers, strong and steady, anchoring her through the storm tearing through her body. He did not panic, not even when she cried out, not even when her nails dug into his palm. Instead, he spoke in a low voice, a tone that carried command and calm at once, telling her to focus on his voice, to breathe through the pain, to remember that she was stronger than fear. She had expected him to be cold, detached, like the stories painted him to be, but in this darkened space, his presence felt like a shield. The silence between contractions was filled with questions racing through her mind. Why was this man, a stranger of sorts, so determined to stay at her side? Why did his eyes, sharp as storm clouds, hold a flicker of something that looked like sorrow whenever he looked at her? She wanted to ask, but the pain stole her words, leaving only gasps and trembling silence. Outside the windows, the city blurred by, neon lights streaking into colors that matched the chaos inside her chest. Adrian gave an order to the driver, his voice clipped and urgent, demanding the fastest route to the hospital. The driver answered, but Isabella barely heard, her focus narrowing to the rhythm of her breathing and the warmth of Adrian's hand gripping hers. Another contraction hit, and she cried out, tears burning her eyes. For a moment she thought she would collapse under the weight of it, but Adrian shifted closer, his other hand brushing the damp strands of hair from her forehead. His touch was unexpected, almost tender, and the contrast to his hard reputation left her shaken. He whispered again that she was not alone, that he would not let anything happen to her or the baby. She clung to the words, even though she did not understand them. The car swerved suddenly to avoid a reckless driver, throwing Isabella forward with a sharp jolt. Adrian's arm came around her instinctively, pulling her against his chest, protecting her from the impact. Her heart hammered wildly, and for a fleeting second the fear of pain was replaced by the shocking awareness of how fiercely he shielded her. It was not the duty of a patron at an art gallery, nor the obligation of a stranger. It was something deeper, something he did not want to name. As the hospital lights appeared in the distance, Isabella's tears blurred her vision. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to face this alone, but her body trembled in his hold, betraying her, and when she looked up at him, his eyes locked on hers with a fire that promised something she had not dared hope for. Not pity, not judgment, but a vow he had silently made the moment he reached for her in that gallery. The car slowed, nurses rushing out to meet them, the night air thick with urgency. But even as the doors opened and hands reached in to help, Isabella clung tighter to Adrian's hand, terrified of letting go. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this night was not just about survival. It was the start of a bond that would change everything, a bond neither of them could escape, no matter how hard they tried. The hospital corridors echoed with hurried footsteps, and the sharp scent of antiseptic clung to the air. Nurses guided Isabella onto a stretcher, their voices urgent, but her eyes never left Adrian. Even as the fluorescent lights passed above her in blinding flashes, she searched for him, afraid that at any moment he would disappear back into the world of shadows and wealth he belonged to. Yet when the door swung open, there he was, striding beside her, refusing to let go of her trembling hand. The staff whispered in surprise, recognizing his face, but he silenced their questions with one look. Inside the delivery room, chaos surged. Doctors spoke quickly, nurses prepared equipment, monitors beeped in a relentless rhythm. Isabella's body ached with each wave of pain, sweat dampening her forehead. But the worst of it was the fear clawing at her chest. She whispered that she could not do it, that the pain was too much, that she was afraid of what would happen if something went wrong. Adrian leaned closer, his voice cutting through the noise, telling her that she was not weak, that she had already carried life this far, and that he believed in her more than she believed in herself. His words steadied her breathing, though her heart still pounded with dread. Time blurred into hours or minutes, she could not tell. The contractions grew sharper, each one pulling a cry from her throat. She squeezed his hand so hard she thought she might break it, but Adrian never flinched. Instead, he bent his head, whispering to her that she was stronger than the pain, that every scream was a step closer to holding her child. His gray eyes, fierce and unwavering, never left hers. Then the moment came. A final surge of agony ripped through her, and she screamed until her voice broke, the sound echoing off sterile walls. And then, in the silence that followed, the cry of a newborn pierced the house. E-room. High and fragile yet filled with life, it shattered every barrier around her heart. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed the small bundle in her arms. The baby's skin was warm, her tiny fists curling against Isabella's chest, her cries softening as she recognized her mother's heartbeat. Isabella wept openly, whispering to her daughter that she was safe, that she was loved, that she had waited for this moment through every night of fear and loneliness. But when she looked up, she saw Adrian standing there, his face no longer a mask of stone. His eyes shone with something raw, something almost broken. His hand trembled slightly as he reached forward, brushing the baby's blanket as if afraid to touch too much. The doctor spoke to Isabella about rest, but her attention was caught by the shadow passing across Adrian's face. He turned away for a moment, pulling out his phone, speaking in a low tone she could not catch. His words carried weight. Urgency, as if this night had awakened something far beyond the walls of the hospital. When he returned, his expression was calm, but Isabella could feel the storm hiding beneath it. As she cradled her child, she realized Adrian was more than a stranger who had stepped in at the right moment. He carried secrets behind those eyes, secrets tied to pain and loss, secrets that connected him to her in ways she did not yet understand. And though exhaustion pulled at her, she could not silence the question now burning in her mind. Why had this man, who had every reason to stay distant, chosen to claim her struggle as his own? In the quiet of the hospital room, as machines hummed and her baby's breath warmed her skin, Isabella felt the threads of her life weaving into his. She did not yet know if it would save her or destroy her, but the bond had been sealed the moment her child entered the world under Adrian Blackwell's watchful gaze. The hospital room was dim except for the faint glow of a lamp by the bed. Isabella stirred awake to the sound of soft coos, her heart tightening as she saw her daughter nestled safely in the crib beside her. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly shadowed by the sight of Adrian Blackwell seated by the window. He was still in his black suit, though his tie was loosened, his posture tense. He had not left. Even in silence, his presence filled the room, heavy with a mix of power and mystery. When Isabella tried to speak, her voice cracked. She asked why he was still here, why a man like him would care enough to spend the night in a hospital chair beside a woman he barely knew. Adrian's eyes met hers, sharp and unreadable, before drifting toward the baby. He did not answer at first. Instead, he stood, walked to the crib, and bent to lift the child into his arms with surprising gentleness. The millionaire, who was rumored to have no heart, rocked the newborn with the ease of someone who had practiced long ago. Isabella's breath caught, unsettled by the tenderness in a man who was supposed to be made of stone. By morning, the whispers began. Nurses lingered in the hallway, gossiping about the reclusive Adrian Blackwell who would not leave the side of an unwed mother. Visitors passed by, glancing in with raised brows. Isabella felt the sting of judgment return, yet it was Adrian who silenced it. When a nurse questioned whether he should be allowed to hold the baby so freely, his eyes hardened and his voice cut like steel. He told them he would not let this child be treated as anything less than precious. The staff fell silent, unsettled by his authority. Over the following days, Adrian returned again and again. He brought supplies before Isabella even thought to ask. He paid for the best private care without consulting her. He was there when she struggled to feed the baby, his large hands carefully holding the bottle when hers trembled. The bond he formed with the infant was undeniable, his eyes softening only when they rested on her. Isabella could not help but feel both comforted and terrified. It was as if Adrian had claimed a place in their fragile world without permission, and part of her feared what it meant. Yet the unease grew stronger when she noticed him making phone calls outside her door. His voice was low, controlled, but she caught fragments that made her chest tighten. He spoke of protecting them, of watching someone closely, of not allowing the past to interfere. When she asked who he was speaking to, he brushed it off with a cool expression, saying only that he was handling matters that did not concern her. That night, unable to sleep, Isabella watched him from her bed. He sat once more by the window, the baby asleep against his chest. The moonlight cut across his face, revealing not just strength, but sorrow etched deep into his features. It struck her then that Adrian Blackwell was not simply a man of wealth and power. He was a man haunted. She wanted to ask what ghosts followed him, but fear kept her silent. Still, one truth was undeniable. With every hour that passed, the barrier between them weakened. And though Isabella told herself she should keep her distance, her heart betrayed her, drawn to the enigma of a man who had stepped out of the shadows and now stood as protector to both her and her child. What she did not yet know was that his protection came with a price, and that soon the world outside the hospital walls would test just how far Adrian Blackwell was willing to go. The rain came down hard the day Isabella was discharged, sheets of water striking the pavement as though the heavens themselves were restless. Adrian's car waited at the entrance, sleek and black, a silent fortress against the storm. Nurses whispered as he carried the infant in one arm and shielded Isabella with the other, their disbelief following the trio out into the night. Isabella's heart pounded, not only from the weight of stepping into a new life with her baby, but from the unsettling realization that Adrian Blackwell was entwining himself deeper into her world with every passing moment. At first it felt like safety. His penthouse was prepared for them before she could protest, stocked with everything a newborn could need, from soft blankets to custom furniture. The vast windows looked out over the glittering city, a view that might have stolen her breath if her mind was not consumed by questions. She asked again why he was doing all this, why a man who lived in shadows and silence would open his life to her. His reply was simple, yet terrifying. He said he could not walk away, not now, not ever. His tone carried the weight of a vow, and though her heart fluttered, a thread of fear wound tighter around her ribs. Days passed, and Adrian's devotion to the baby grew impossible to ignore. He held her with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor of his cold heart, whispering to her in the dark when she cried, pacing the halls until she fell asleep against his chest. Isabella would wake at night to find him standing by the crib, staring down at the child with an expression she could not decipher. It was longing, sorrow, and something fierce all at once. But what unsettled her most was the sense that he was claiming more than just a role of protector. He was claiming the child as his own. The storm inside the penthouse grew when a figure from Isabella's past appeared. Late one afternoon, as she rocked the baby near the window, the doorbell echoed through the vast space. She froze when the voice rang out in the hall. It was him, the man who had abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant, the man who now returned with a smirk and a lawyer's letter in his hand. He demanded to see his child, mocking her weakness, sneering that she had found herself a rich savior to cover her shame. Before Isabella could reply, Adrian appeared in the doorway, his presence dark and commanding. His gaze cut through the intruder like steel, his voice low yet lethal. He warned him that neither Isabella nor the baby would be touched, that any attempt to take them would be met with consequences beyond his comprehension. The intruder laughed, mocking Adrian's authority, calling him nothing more than a collector of broken things. But the laughter faltered when Adrian stepped closer, his eyes burning with a promise of ruin. Isabella's heart raced as she watched the standoff. She wanted to believe Adrian's protection was enough, but fear twisted inside her. Was she trading one controlling man for another? Was Adrian's vow born of love or obsession? Was she safe in his world or trapped in a cage of luxury that glittered too brightly to escape? The door finally slammed shut, the echo rattling the walls. Adrian turned to her, his jaw tight, his fists still clenched. For the first time, she saw the darkness he kept hidden, the fury beneath his calm. He promised her again that nothing would take the baby from her, that he would destroy anyone who tried. His words should have comforted her, but instead they left her trembling, torn between gratitude and dread. The storm outside raged on, lightning splitting the sky, and Isabella realized the battle for her child had only begun. And Adrian Blackwell, with all his wealth and secrets, was not just her savior. He was now part of the fight, and he would not let go, no matter the cost. The city had barely recovered from the storm when another storm took root inside Adrian's penthouse. The baby slept peacefully in the nursery, but Isabella paced the hall outside, her heart pounding with every echo of Adrian's footsteps. He had spent the evening on the phone, his voice low and clipped, giving orders to men she could not see. She caught fragments of words that made her chest tighten: surveillance, protection, eliminate risks. Each syllable dripped with danger. She pressed her back against the cold wall, asking herself if she had brought her child into safety or into the hands of a man who wielded power like a weapon. That night she could not sleep. The moonlight stretched across the polished floors as she moved toward the sound of Adrian's voice. He was in his study, the door ajar, and she froze in the shadows when she heard him whisper her name. He was not speaking to anyone in the room. His voice cracked as he spoke about what he had lost years ago, about a woman and a child who never saw the light of this world. His grief clung to every word, a grief so raw that it cut into Isabella's chest. For the first time she saw the truth. He was not protecting her only out of kindness. He was protecting her because she carried the image of everything he once lost. The revelation shook her. She stepped back, the floor creaking beneath her weight. Adrian's head lifted, his eyes finding hers through the sliver of the doorway. There was no use pretending she had not heard. He crossed the room in silence, his face stripped of the cold mask he wore in public. In the dim light, she saw a man haunted, his gaze heavy with sorrow and fire. He told her the truth then, words spilling out like confessions he had buried for too long. Years ago he had loved, deeply and fiercely. But an accident had taken both the woman and the unborn child. Since then he had built walls so high no one dared climb them. Until her. Isabella's breath shook as she listened. She wanted to feel pity, but what surged instead was fear. If Adrian had lost once and failed to protect them, what would he do now to make sure he never lost again? Could his devotion to her child twist into possession? Could his love for what she represented become a chain she would never break? She whispered that she did not want to become a replacement for a ghost, but Adrian stepped closer, his voice low and unyielding. He said he saw her, not a shadow of his past, but a woman who carried courage and fire in a world that mocked her. He said he saw the baby not as a stand-in for what he had lost, but as proof that life could still give back what it had stolen. His words burned into her, stirring a longing she did not want to admit. Yet the suspense only deepened when the phone on his desk rang again. Adrian answered with a shift in his tone, his face hardening. Someone had moved against them. Someone was watching Isabella, circling closer. His jaw tightened as he ordered his men to track the threat, his eyes flicking back to her with a vow that chilled her blood. He would not lose her or the baby, no matter what he had to do. Isabella stood frozen, torn between gratitude and terror, her heart pounding at the revelation of both his grief and his vow. She knew then that the fight was not just with her past, it was with Adrian's demons, his relentless need to control what fate had once stolen. And as the night deepened, the question clawed at her. Was this the kind of protection she could trust, or was it the beginning of a cage she would never escape? The morning sun spilled across the city, but inside Adrian's penthouse, the light felt cold. Isabella stood at the window, holding her baby close, her mind torn apart by everything she had heard the night before. Adrian's confession lingered in her chest like a weight she could not shake. His past loss explained his fierce devotion, but it also terrified her. He had built his life on control, on never allowing weakness again. And now she wondered if she and her child were just pieces of a vow he had made long ago to never fail again. She turned when she heard footsteps. Adrian entered the room, his presence filling the space like thunderclouds. He carried a folder in his hand, its edges worn from use, and when he placed it on the table, she saw her own name written across the front. Her heart dropped. She opened it with trembling hands and found documents inside, her employment history, medical records, even photographs of her taken without her knowledge. Every page screamed of surveillance. She looked at him in horror, demanding to know how long he had been watching her. Adrian did not flinch. He admitted he had known about her long before the night at the gallery. He claimed he had only wanted to ensure she was safe, that he had uncovered threats circling her and her child, but his calm words only deepened her dread. It was not protection, it was control. She felt her chest tighten, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. Isabella's voice broke as she accused him of trying to own her life, of stepping into her world not out of love, but out of obsession. She told him she would not be anyone's possession, not even his. For the first time, his composure cracked, his jaw clenching, his eyes dark with something dangerous. He told her she did not understand what enemies waited beyond those doors, that without him, she and her baby would already be lost. His voice was steady, but his words carried a desperation he could not hide. The argument shook the walls. Isabella's tears spilled as she pulled her baby tighter to her chest and stormed past him. She fled to the guest room, locking the door, her heart racing with betrayal. The man she had begun to trust, the man who had carried her through her most vulnerable night, had been watching her long before she even knew his name. Hours passed in silence until the sound of shattering glass ripped through the penthouse. Isabella jolted, her body trembling, and through the crack in the door she saw Adrian rushing toward the balcony. A brick lay on the floor surrounded by broken shards, a note tied to it with words scrawled in bold black ink. It was a threat, sharp and merciless, promising that her baby would be taken unless she gave in. The fear in her chest turned to ice. Adrian held the note in his fist, his expression unreadable, but his shoulders shook with fury. He swore no one would ever touch her child, that he would burn the world to ashes before letting it happen. Isabella felt her knees weaken as she realized the truth. She was caught between two storms, one outside the penthouse and one inside the heart of Adrian Blackwell, and she did not know which one was more dangerous. The night of the follow-up exhibition arrived with a tension that hung heavier than the velvet curtains drawn across the gallery doors. Isabella had not wanted to return, but the organizers insisted her presence was necessary. She stood at the edge of the grand hall with her baby in her arms, every nerve in her body alert, every whisper from the crowd a reminder of how fragile her world had become. Adrian moved through the room beside her like a shadow cloaked in authority. His eyes scanned every corner, his body taut with vigilance, as though he was waiting for the storm to strike. It came faster than she imagined. Her ex emerged from the crowd dressed in arrogance, his voice loud enough to silence the music. He announced that Isabella's child was his by blood, and no amount of money or power could change that. The guests gasped, the whispers swelling into a storm of gossip. Isabella's face drained of color, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter. Adrian stepped forward, his presence cutting the noise like a blade. He held up a folder, thicker than the one Isabella had once found, and revealed the truth in front of them all. He exposed documents, photographs, and testimonies that revealed her ex had abandoned her intentionally, bribed doctors to mislead her, and signed away his rights in secret transactions. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the mask of charm fell from the man's face, replaced by fury and desperation. In a moment of madness, her ex lunged forward, reaching for the baby. The crowd screamed, security faltered, but Adrian was faster. His hand closed around the man's arm with a force that made him drop to his knees. His voice was low but lethal as he warned that if he ever came near Isabella or the child again, he would be destroyed not only in this city, but in every corner of the world where his name dared appear. The ex's struggle turned into panic when Adrian handed the evidence to the authorities waiting nearby. Within minutes, he was dragged out, his shouts echoing uselessly against the marble walls. The gallery fell silent. Every guest who had once mocked Isabella now stared with wide eyes, unable to deny the truth laid bare before them. But Isabella's focus was not on them. It was on Adrian, who stood before her no longer as a cold, untouchable collector, but as a man stripped of every wall, his devotion laid open in the fire of his actions. When the hall finally emptied and the night quieted, Isabella turned to him. Her voice trembled as she asked why he had gone to such lengths, why he had risked his name, his fortune, his entire reputation for her and her child. His answer came softly, yet it carried the weight of every loss he had ever endured. He told her that when he first saw her in the gallery, mocked and alone, he saw the reflection of the life he had once failed to protect. He said he could not stand by again, that somewhere between protecting her and holding her child, he had found something he never thought he could feel again: love. Isabella's tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she looked into his gray eyes, no longer cold but filled with a quiet ache. She felt the walls around her heart crumble, felt the weight of his truth press against her fear. For months she had carried the burden of judgment alone, but now she understood that Adrian was not here to own her or control her. He was here to stand beside her, to guard the fragile life she had brought into the world, and to claim the love he had once lost but found again in her. She placed her daughter gently in his arms, watching as the child curled against him with complete trust. Her voice broke as she told him that he did not need to claim them because they already belonged to him, not as possessions, but as family. The night ended not with applause or whispers, but with a vow made in the silence between them. A vow that this time Adrian Blackwell would not lose what fate had once taken. And Isabella, holding his hand as tightly as he once held hers, realized the truth she had feared to admit. The millionaire had not just claimed the baby. He had claimed her heart, and she no longer wanted it any other way.